I'm Aurora.
I'm Eric.
This is a Family Retort when we're cousins.
We're bringing you our dinner-side conversations.
This week, I thought it'd be fun if we could talk about media literacy. And so, to start off, we had a discussion in a previous conversation where I asked Eric about something, and when we delved deeper into it, I found out it was this one Republican guy that was had this idea and policy, and Eric was like, "You know what? This is not going to become a widespread thing." So I was curious Eric's methodology about who you follow, how you know what's going to become big, what's not, how you know who like what to listen to, how you know it's real because I think especially with the current conflict going on, there's so much misinformation going on and it's very hard in the world of misinformation to know what's real and what's not.
Yeah. No, I can kind of understand that. The topic we discussed, I mean, we could just kind of throw it out there, was I believe a Republican was trying to repeal the no fault divorces, which in summary, I said, okay, that's a bit ridiculous. And I don't think there's really any Republican that's going to stand by that. That's kind of a stupid, it's kind of a stupid thing.
Well, but here's the thing is there were a few other there was a few murmurings of it in a few different states here and there, and it kind of seemed ridiculous that abortion rights would be repealed or the right to have medical privacy would be
Well,
repealed.
we
That
did.
seemed ridiculous at the time when people were pointing out and people saying,
Ah,
"Hey, this is what they're trying to do," and a lot of
okay.
people are saying, "No, it's
See,
already legally in law. Nobody's going to repeal it." Blah blah blah.
no, this is interesting for me because I saw the repealing of the abortion stuff as, yeah, I could see that happening because of the media sources I was reading.
Okay,
And then your
because
media sources said there's no way in hell that they'll be able to do this. This is
no. So here's the thing:
ridiculous.
is my leftist media sources were very worried about it. All the centrist media sources were like, "Don't be ridiculous." Right media sources aren't the right isn't trying to repeal abortion rights, and the left was like, "No, they totally are," and moderates were like, "No, they aren't." So there's this kind of contention between all these different political factions, right?
Yeah. So, okay, here's a question. So, we obviously consume different media people. Usually we have biases. Which organizations do you follow? Do you listen to? What kind of, I guess, tinted eyeglasses do you fall under for your media? Because all of them are
So
biased. Let's just get that out of the way.
right,
If
all
you
media
think,
is biased. For me personally, because I know that, I try my best to diversify. Like I try to follow a bunch of different people, and even though I even follow some I follow some moderate people, I follow right people. Like I make sure to follow the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Philip DeFranco, like all kinds of different.
oh my God, Philip
Um,
DeFranco is so blue. He is so, he's so bad about that.
hey, he's pro gun, okay?
Yeah, okay, that still doesn't mean you're not very far left. Anyway, go
Well,
on. That's
you know what?
fair.
That's fair. That's fair. But he's very open about his bias and his here's the
Yeah.
facts and here's my
Yeah.
opinion about them,
Okay,
and that
that's
is much better than painting what he somebody your own opinion is fact, right? Like that's what I'm trying to get is
Oh
I do
yeah,
try.
yeah. He's not trying to hide it like
Yeah,
some
so
people.
I
I
try.
I get it.
I specifically try to follow people who like to openly state their bias so that I know, like people who try to sneakily hide their bias or present themselves as purely objective, I feel like are almost more deceptive because we all have personal bias, right?
Yeah.
But so I try to diversify the media even if I very much disagree with it. Like, oh man, the amount of Wall Street Journal things that I'm like, this is not how things work. I disagree.
Yeah.
How about you? Which ones do you follow? What kind of bias do you have?
Okay. So on my side, I occasionally look at Fox just because I'm curious. I already know that they're pretty, right leaning. But I used to watch Louder with Crowder for a while until the whole thing came out with his wife, and I was like, dude, this guy's a piece of shit. Um, Fuck him. And I
Oh, I'm so
unsubscribed
th-
and do all that kind of stuff because he's yeah, his stuff recently has gone really downhill. Just like I don't know, it just
this
seems
is really interesting to me because I think, like, especially when we talk about artists and like authors, you can very much differentiate like somebody's personal life from like what they create. But like in this like scenario, how somebody is in their personal life affected how you viewed what they were reporting, and you could see how it ended up affecting their content in the like
yeah.
down the line.
Well, look, if you tout your morals as kind of a selling point, right? Because that's what it was. It was like, he has these Christian, uh, all about family, home values. They're not, huge, but that's part of the, I guess, what
Oh
he
yeah.
presented. The
Ugh.
way he presented the information was under this
If you
lens.
make that as a selling point, then
Yeah,
you
exactly.
better be delivering that. Because if
Yeah,
you're a piece of shit, then you're not. Ugh. Okay,
exactly. So
I totally feel you on that.
and that's kind of why I like some of the people I watch. Which one of the more extreme examples, and I know is a little bit more extreme, is like oh man, the Rageaholic. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Totally not.
Okay, he's very right and very loud and boisterous. That's a good way of putting him. Very right. Some other
I feel like
people,
you've mentioned Ben Shapiro a lot. Do you listen to
yeah,
the
I
Daily
I
Wire?
not all the time. I do listen to some people. I like Andrew Clavin. I think his um man, I'm sorry, Kim. There's so many you're gonna have to help us out with. This one's bad for me. I've also been drinking a little bit too. So anyway, yes, I listen to Ben Shapiro. I also listen to John Strussel, I believe. He used to be a 2020 reporter, and he started during his investigations. He's noticed how, I guess, messed up things were. I don't know if that's the best way I can describe it, but he's a libertarian, and
Oh, interesting.
he has some really good points on government overreach and all these kind of things, and there's just some really good just reporting type stuff.
I found that I think like a lot of YouTube essayists actually do better investigative reporting these days. Um, than other options. Like, I feel like journalists these days, they don't actually get hard hitting investigative reporting. It's like maybe they might follow up and report on a story that somebody else did, but if you want like a cutting edge reported story, somebody who did in-depth research, who like did all the dots, it's some guy on YouTube
Yeah.
did like an hour long thing that it took him a month to research.
Or even like 15-hour long YouTube video. I'll sit through them too. If it's good, if they're well constructed and interesting, I'll sit through these. But I definitely like the Daily Wire people. I think they're really good. I think most of them are decent. Some of them I don't really like to watch, and I don't
Well,
watch them every day,
how can you
honestly.
tell which ones are decent and which ones are not? Like, how do you know which ones to choose? What
Honestly,
is your criteria?
it's just more personal preference than anything. I like the way Andrew Clavin presents things. It's more of like a, kind of joking about this stuff, not taking it too seriously, but, he has some very good points, usually when it
So,
comes to politics. Even like Ben Shapiro, even when Trump was in office, he even said, like, I didn't vote for him myself. Like, I didn't. Well, he said he voted for him, but he wished there was somebody else. And when Trump screwed up, he was very critical of his screw ups, and when he did stuff right, he was very objective. And I know Ben Shapiro gets a lot of shit for a lot of different things, but I feel like his point of view is very grounded and it's taken from like a family man perspective. I think that's where Ben Shapiro has a good beat on things, and he's also, uh, a lawyer first and foremost too. So he has a lot of nuances that other people don't have. Like I said, it's really just personal preference.
Well, I'm kind of curious about what your personal preference is and how you decide those criteria. Because, um, so to you, Ben Shapiro kind of has that nuance that maybe some others don't have. So that's why he's in your list of ones that you kind of follow.
Yeah, especially
And
if it's talking to like I said, I heard from Ben Shapiro, and he broke down why he thought when the abortion stuff would go up to the Supreme Court, which it did, why it was going to get repealed you know,
before it did,
before it did.
interesting.
And he had some really good poignant, points on the matter, and it was a very well constructed argument. And I think that's why I like him, because he has very well constructed arguments.
So, and then the other portion of it is that there's a certain like moral family man easygoing vibe that you need to have the host to have for you to
Well,
to
it's
vibe
not
with
so
kind of.
much easygoing. Like, you don't need to be easygoing for my personal stuff. But what
Okay.
about, like, for you? What qualifies a respectable presenter or trustable
So here's the thing
site?
is to me is I don't trust anything 100%. So
No,
what
yeah,
I
neither
do
do
is
I.
I try to get as diverse a range as possible. So like when my side was very defund the police, right? There was a lot of there was pro activists saying defund the police. There were black people saying no, we don't want to defund the police. Here's that. So I was trying to listen to a bunch of different people and their opinion on it and their sources to try to decide and their like own life experiences and their own discussion and agreements to try to decide what it was. So and even though I was kind of confused by the slogan at first, and I saw how that slogan affected people on Facebook. How I saw people being very pro Black Lives Matter to all of a sudden being very pro police and kind of turning against like supporting reducing police brutality. Um, so I personally wasn't like into the slogan. I like did research into what defund the police meant, what peace abolition meant. So like instead of jumping to conclusions, I just tried to do more research on what that meant and I even read like books and shit. Um but before I drew my conclusions and I followed a bunch of different abolitionists who kind of talked about, well, what is our understanding of crime? Even though I initially didn't really like, I wasn't fond of it at first, right? So
Yeah.
I tried to, make sure that I am listening to all sides of each argument so that I know that I'm hearing all the different sides of the facts. And so there are other like, especially on Twitter, I do follow a lot of specific type of activists and specific type of journalists, but I don't
Oh,
have like one
I
specific
I'm not even
name that I follow.
really. So you kind of more are I guess the more in the traditional sense, you follow like, oh gosh, like Bloomington or the AP Post or that kind of thing versus like a group of reporters, like a newspaper.
No, I follow individual like support. Like I follow individual reporters on Twitter that report on things. Like
Ah, man,
people
I
who
I just think
people who
well,
write for the New York Times, for this and that, for these other things, for
it's
for the Washington Post, like people who are freelance journalists, I follow them.
okay.
And I follow a bunch of different activists, but to me, it's very confusing because I don't follow like a few key people. I do like Philip DeFranco as kind of like a big
Okay.
summary guy, but
Interesting.
I feel like he is a good like here are some of the facts, but I'm not a religious follower of any one person. You know, my when I
Interesting.
lived with my
Okay.
parents during COVID, they used to listen to MSNBC a lot, and I
Um,
disagreed with a lot of that
I
stuff. Like
mean,
I didn't hey, I liked
it,
Rachel Maddow, but other
it,
than that, I wasn't a fond of
I feel like
MSNBC.
MSNBC is okay. Uh, it's not the worst. It's
It's not terrible, but
it's not the
all
best
media
either.
has inherent
Yeah.
bias, and I think that like to me, I feel like MSNBC isn't willing enough to be critical of Democrats if we like but I understand why. Like it's the pro Democrat channel basically,
So
right? Just
here,
like Fox is the pro Republican channel.
yeah.
So
Here,
it is
here's
what it
something
is.
for you. Do you go out of your way to follow the other side of the argument? Like specifically, we'll say one of the more extreme, well, quote unquote extreme Republican or left leaning people, and do you watch their stuff at all? Because I do watch the Young Turks every now and again, and I know they're on the
Oh, ooh.
very extreme side of things. I take it with a
I
grain of
have
salt, but I'm just
I
curious.
I have actually seen a few of their stuff and I like deliberately unfollowed them.
Yeah, they're horrible. Don't get me wrong, but out of curiosity and
But
like
I
I need
have
to
done
know.
that here and there every once in a while, but generally part of my idea of trying to get the vein of things is like that's what you're there for, Eric. Like I don't want to have to do that.
Fair enough. So some other people I do like and I like shouting out to is I watch a lot of like interviews, if that makes sense. More
Oh,
I would say I watch a lot of interview stuff more than I do actual media, like reporting media. So
I feel
this
like interviews are
includes
good.
like trigonometry, which is a British, we'll say whatever
Actually,
their versions.
I do, I do like the BBC. I
Well,
have
they're
heard
not
good things
BBC.
about it.
They're very right leaning, but they interview like a lot of people and they kind of like explain on professionals from the industry. So one of them was like, are you familiar with Uncle Roger? The just the funny comedian.
Yes,
He's like your uncle, and then he does funny skits, basically
maybe.
blasting how people are cooking.
Yeah, where he's like, "What do you mean you didn't wash your rice?"
Yeah, exactly that guy, Uncle
Okay.
Roger. Him. So they interviewed like Uncle Roger, and basically he explains why he was canceled and like all kinds of stuff like that. Which I
Interesting.
find is very interesting to kind of give their side of the story. I also just watched a hour long thing over the whole crazy uh well the game Hogwarts Legacy came out. It's been some time now, so it's old news. But just the absolute insanity of Twitter around that whole thing, and then basically harassing people off the internet, like big YouTubers off the internet. Like I think it's Pikmin. She was a VTuber, and a few other VTubers that these people just harassed and harassed because they were playing a fucking game because it was tangentially related to maybe something, you know.
See here, like for me, when there's that kind of controversy going on, I try to listen. I try to find out like what specifically are the things, because usually it's not just like somebody's not just canceled for one thing. They're like, this person said something racist at
No,
this time, and then
no,
this
no, no,
time, and
no,
then this time,
no.
and usually,
This one, straight up, people were being pieces of shit and harassing these VTubers because they wanted to play Hogwarts Legacy because the activists didn't like J.K. Rowling. No,
well,
I'm not gonna
I
get it.
mean, we
I'm not
can
gonna
get
get
in.
into it,
Yeah,
but
it was a little bit more than just that. It was the
it
person
wasn't.
she chose
It
to
wasn't.
lead the game.
No, 100%. These people were just being pieces of shit on Twitter. I'm gonna say it. Fuck them and their bullshit attitude.
I mean, you can have that opinion. That's fine. Um,
You're
to
like,
me,
I don't want to
I
touch this with a 10-foot pole.
this is well, to me, the reason why I was very off put was she specifically chose someone who deliberately wanted to like offend snowflakes and was has a history of doing. She chose like the person to run the game, to produce the game, as somebody who had other
Who?
bigoted beliefs.
Who?
I don't
Who is
know.
this
I'll have
person?
to look it back up.
Exactly.
It was
It was a
uh,
fucking game studio. She had no part in this. Warner Brothers owned the full. See, this is why media bias is important. You're right. And knowing your media bias. Because if you looked into this, specifically this, people would understand that she had no part in the game. She doesn't get even royalties from the game. It's
oh,
all
she
owned.
doesn't.
No, you need
Huh.
to look really deep for this one, and I'll send you a video afterwards where somebody broke it down really well. But she doesn't receive royalties. It was just they wanted to. This was the thing. They wanted to fight this because J.K. Rowling was in charge of Harry Potter, or so they assumed, and she had input in everything and gets money for everything, which is not the case. This kind of corporate, like IP, intellectual property stuff, is complicated as fuck, and just I can't even get into it because it's outside of my scope, right?
Okay.
It is
Right. We don't have to get
way
into it.
outside. But to summarize, she probably doesn't even get any royalties from the game. It's all the game
She
dev.
probably, or she definitely doesn't.
She more than likely does not because she sold the rights to the games long ago to Warner Brothers. So she basically
Okay.
already made her money off of the games.
Okay, so she lost game rights to it because
Yeah.
she sold off the game rights. Okay.
In summary, I'm summarizing a shit ton of stuff here, but that's essentially what's going on. So these people get hissy fits over what they assume is something, and then harass people to the point of them leaving the internet, and then they double down on them and be like, "Oh well, there's more to it than just that." It's like, no, you're being pieces of shit. Fuck off. That's my 2 cents, and I'll leave it at that. And that's why I
Okay.
think going in depth, looking at it, I got most of this information from a few different YouTubers who did the digging, who did the research, who did everything, right?
Do you follow up and like kind of look at sources sometimes?
Yeah, most of the time, when I watch these videos, they do have sources available. I will look at them and double check if that makes
Because that's
sense.
also something that I like to do, is like if somebody's asserting something, I try to like check that source and like look into what their sources are. That helps. That's like what tells me if I want to trust that person or not, is if they cite sources. Because if they're just saying like, oh, 95% of this or that, then I'm like, okay,
You know,
sure, but like I can't trust that that's true if they don't have sources, you know?
statistics are so misleading. It's ridiculous.
They actually, that's specifically why I try to go by like percentages. This is like a less controversial thing, but like there's this talk there's a Twitter movement in general where we're basically trying to get more density, more building, to repeal certain zoning reforms. And I personally used to be very much like, oh, no, 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 anti developer. like anti-gentrifier because I was like very not understanding it. But like once I had more information, I looked into it more and I found out like I just looked up actual census data and found out that the states that had more building permits per capita were cheaper to live in than states that had less permits per capita. So it's when you're looking at like the raw data like that, like percentages and like population, I think those really help
Yeah.
for me to be like, okay, well, what's the like raw data? Let me go look at what the raw data is. It's not a perfect science because um there is that is something you have to go to school for is, like, learning how to interpret raw data, but I feel like some things you can be like, "Okay, these are connections that you can make on your own
Hmm.
if you just look some shit up by yourself." But it has to but you have to actually have the desire to look it up to, like, change your own mind about stuff.
So something I found interesting was there was a pharmaceutical drug, and this is goes into the data manipulation type thing, right? Where I don't remember the exact name of the drug. I'll have to look it up. But they presented, oh, if you take this drug, you will be 6% less at risk for heart attack or some crazy number like that. But what they did was they took all the people who was like 1% had better blood pressure or whatever, and then they used those numbers to say, oh well, 6% of these people were on this drug, so obviously there's a correlation between our drug and them, when it's really like
Oh,
point
that's super sketchy.
0.1% of people. It was such a minor percentage showed any significant. There was like no significant anything. It could have been sugar pills, right?
Well, that's why, like, looking at raw data is so important sometimes, right? Like, looking up
Yeah,
sources and finding out stuff. But that's really hard to understand because they people can present such biased statistics.
yeah. They
Like,
go, oh my gosh, you're 6% less
well,
likely to get a heart attack on this medication when it's like six
a lot of
percent of like 1%. So
like, a
it's
lot of
so
people like
low.
to assert that, like, the kids of single dads do better than single moms. And when you look at the data, it's because single dads have more money than single moms, and that's why those kids do better.
Really?
But they yeah, it was, like, a really interesting
Huh.
somebody did, like, a little deep dive into it where it was, like, it wasn't about, like, "Oh, you need a father in the home," or, like, "Oh, like, a mother in the home." It's, like, really, kids just need fucking money, you know?
Yeah, no
Like,
kidding.
your parents' economic status matters, you know?
Yeah.
But a lot of people like to shit on single moms by using this statistic. Um, and I thought that that was such an interesting thing to learn. Like I had no skin in the well, I guess like yeah, no, I had no skin in the game because like personally, I never was without a dad. But I would have been fine if my mom was a single mom. So like, I mean, like, you know, so
Oh,
it was
so if we're going to like people, so I like certain YouTubers, right? I think that's a better way of doing media than honestly the traditional type media, like watching CNN, Fox, MSNBC, any of those people. Really,
mhm.
those are the three big players. I also like here's some other people I watch. So PragerU, I know they're pretty right leaning, but I think they do a good job of presenting some information with a little bit of biases. Other like just personal like commentators. I don't know if you've heard of this person. She's called Baggage Claim.
I haven't heard of baggage claim, but as for educational channels, I really liked Crash Course. Like I listened to all of Crash Course Economics. That was really fun.
Hmm.
Um,
And
they're
I
like a PBS type thing where it's like a
interesting.
nonprofit. So I feel like nonprofits are good. to try to find information from.
Yeah, I can see that. And for like my libertarian stuff, I watch Liberty Doll, but she pretty much reports on like Second Amendment type related stuff more than anything.
Hmm.
And she goes deep dives into this stuff and why the ATF sucks because they do, so on and so forth. So it's pretty like I know I have biases and I still follow related stuff, but I try and get as level headed as possible.
Do you ever try to do stuff that counteracts your bias? Like, I know that
Yeah, I
Ben
watch
Shapiro is, well, for example, Ben Shapiro is Jewish, so that's like a different perspective, right?
yeah.
Like, just slightly, just slightly. He
Well,
still over agrees with your politics, but he has like a different religion and background a little bit than kind of some of the other guys that you follow, right? To like add diversity to your
mhm.
round out.
Yeah. Well, baggage claim, she's a Indian woman and I watch her perspective on things because I think it's an interesting perspective. And even though she has, we'll say, a more right leaning view on things, it's still, you know, from a diverse perspective, if you will.
Well, okay.
A,
How about a
a,
different perspective?
well, like I said, she's an Indian, she's a woman of color, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, you can only have diverse when you're talking about multiple things. If you're talking about one person who has a different perspective from you, because they have a different identity than you, that's like just a different perspective.
well, okay, so yeah, she has a completely different perspective on things, but it's still, I don't like this because this, and this. This is not what I like. And she does more kind of like um, movie type stuff and talks about Disney, that stuff.
Oh, interesting. Do you feel like you're more almost moderate than some of your media sources?
Well, I'm in a weird spot because I'm libertarian, right?
Oh, totally.
So people will try and say, "Oh, well, you need to vote for my person because blah reason." I go, I don't care. I don't care. Your person sucks. And so does the other blue person and the red
I,
person. They both
well, I feel
suck.
like here's the thing is anybody who wants to be a politician inherently has to suck because to desire to seek power is like inherently something is, you know what I mean?
well,
Like it's like the desire for power is inherently corrupting, and even if you desire to do something good, the system will inherently corrupt anybody who wanted to change anything
I
anyways.
I
So
think there's a phrase you're looking for. Absolute power corrupts.
absolutely.
Yep.
Well, but no, it's just even this, just that we all have a desire for power, but the kind of people that rise in politics and who desire to do politics, has you have to have a certain kind of person, and to do well you just can't be a good person.
yeah. You got to have a few controversies underneath your belt.
I just don't think you're allowed to do well in politics if you're a good person. That's not how you play the game.
I think
You can't be an
okay,
honest
hold on.
person.
I think they started off politicians started off intending to do good, right?
Some do, yeah.
I don't think anybody is there because they were evil and corrupt to begin with. I think their intention originally was to help their constituents. Does that?
Well, I think some people wanted to get glory for helping their constituents.
Yeah, I mean, but still, you would still be helping them. So there's a certain amount of altruism involved. But like my politics are, like I said, libertarian. with conservative leaning. I think the government should just leave me the fuck alone. I can do what I want as long as I'm not harassing other people.
What was that?
Okay, getting back to our conversation. Yes, I think as long as you leave me alone, you don't harass me, and as long as I'm not harassing other people in various forms or forcing them to do something, fine, just leave me be, right? Is that so hard to ask? Apparently, it's impossible to ask that because the government wants to get in your business for every fucking thing there is.
You know, there is this book I read about an anarchist. They had a little revolution, and then the society basically moved them to the moon, and he wants to come to the earth and try to have this little discussion. And he tries to discuss with people, and he honestly is lightly traumatized by capitalist society. And but he's has his own frustrations with his own anarchist society, because as things get as any disaster happens, the bureaucracy becomes stricter and stricter and stricter. Even though nobody has any technical power or more money than anybody else, more resources,
Yeah.
somebody still accumulates power via bureaucracy, and it gets stricter and stricter and stricter. That is the nature of all governments. We didn't used to have passports. We used to all have some level of open borders until World War II, you know?
Yeah,
But
I can see that.
so I understand you're like, why are we like this? Like, why can't we do this? But at the
Well,
same time,
I I think okay, there's a certain level of there needs to be a certain level of hey, you can't do this because that interferes with other people, right? I get that. I'm not saying it's a free for all anarchist, playground here.
well, so here's the thing is, in this anarchist society, social rules are much stricter than laws. And that is very true. Like, the you could have a law, and even in America, it's much more acceptable to break certain laws than it is to break others. It's much more acceptable to, I don't know, do something than to like come into work late, right? Which is a social rule. Because if you make
Well,
things difficult for your coworkers, you could be ostracized, you could lose your job,
yeah,
you
there's
could not ever
consequences to your
get a job.
actions, and
And so social rules are much better at enforcing certain things than laws are in
I
some
don't
ways.
agree. Well, yes and no.
Well, it depends on what kind of society we
Yeah,
are, how tight knit we are, what kind of. But as we develop the internet, we are now surveilled at almost all times. We are now in a surveillance state, right? We're in
you know.
surveillance capitalism now.
All right, I'm gonna be real with you. I miss the old internet. I miss the Wild West. I miss the early
I'm
2000s
I'm
where
extremely thankful that I got to experience some of that, because what it is now is I'm I've basically stopped. I don't like posting that much anymore. I don't like interacting with things. Like, I've gone back to reading books, man. Like, I was a kid, I used to read books a lot. The internet was very fun for, a good 10, 15 years. Now I'm back to reading books. This shit is too
well,
much.
it's just I everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, the internet's become so toxic." I was like, "Bitch, have you ever been on 4chan? Have you been at Kiwi Farms? Have you been to any of these websites? People have been
Hey,
shit talking each
you
other."
chose to go on those sites.
Yeah, exactly.
It is.
You chose to go on those websites. I I'm
Well,
saying
but here's the thing is that, like, other sites are supposed to be moderated. Like, whatever happened to Club Penguin and Neopets for kids? Kids
what
don't have
it,
that shit anymore.
okay. There was still shit that went on Neopets and Club Penguin, and even
I am sure. I am
have
sure. But some stuff is limited by the medium, And some stuff is intentionally allows anything to happen in the Wild West, like 4chan, right? 4chan is deliberately unmoderated, right?
No, it's still moderated. It's just more old school, old way of thinking. How, that's kind of what I say. It's like if you grew up with the internet in the 90s and 2000s, a little bit later in the 2000s, I'll say the MySpace era, right? After that, Facebook, I feel, killed everything.
Totally. I actually Facebook really did change things.
Pretty much after we had Facebook, then the big, Google's, Apple, even if you really want to dive into it, Amazon buys up all of these properties, and you know, Amazon own. If you really look crazy, Amazon owns tons of IPs, and they basically pay little websites pay Amazon to host their website now.
Yeah. And that's why it doesn't matter even if you stop using Amazon, Amazon makes a majority of its money by hosting websites,
Yeah,
just by
it's
using the
crazy.
web.
It's crazy. There's
There is
a
no ethical
lot of compli
consumerism under capitalism. Like it's basically it's not a full monopoly, but it's
Well,
definitely something.
there's ways around it. But if you look at these things, I I know you probably don't agree with this, but if somebody shit talks you online, you just go, meh, there's some asshole on a computer. What the fuck are they gonna do? Right? It doesn't matter what they say. And that's what I grew up with.
That's because you have a real life. No, but here's the thing is the problem is these kids nowadays are not they don't are they're not allowed to have autonomy in the outside world, even though the internet is much more dangerous for them. We have such car dependent infrastructure and they're not allowed in public spaces. We're so anti teen that the majority of their free time has to be spent online with their friends. So your social life is online. If you don't have your social life online, you don't have it's very difficult to have a robust social life as a child, as a kid, even as a young adult to some degree. It's
So you're
it's very
saying
difficult.
um the internet has taken over person to person conversations and hanging out and like a normal social life. You're saying like
I
Facebook
I
has replaced that. I mean, we're getting way off topic, but
not Facebook, but here's the thing is this let's bring it back to how media shapes our society and how our interpretation of media. This is another thing about media literacy. Children growing up on media. This is their whole life now. They are more plugged into media than they get to explore things unplugged from the internet. If children unplug from the internet, for example, I was deliberately separated from technology and their internet in high school as some sort of like new agey this is good for you type thing.
I mean,
I
it
am I
is.
am a generation behind everybody technology wise. I have the skills of a Generation X person. I am behind on people technology wise. I'm behind on people in social media, in cloud building, in all those things that everybody else in my generation is building their careers off of. I do not have those skills that are necessary in order to have careers for this generation.
I, yeah, I can kind of see it.
So it's not you're not allowed to opt out if you want to be a part of this society anymore. Even
I disagree with you to some point. So,
I mean, it's not complete, but you there is a balance and it's important to enforce that balance, but that's why media literacy is important is because it is so
okay,
ever-escent, like it is
I
in
see what you're saying.
everything.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But
It affects everything. It affects people's dynamics at school, right? Everybody watches the same stupid TikTok video that's political misinformation, and one person knows something that everybody else doesn't. That person is on the outs because they have more media literacy than everybody else.
so, okay, we're in the millennial generation. I think you're the same as me,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
So that puts things in perspective too. Here, some of my best friends I've known since high school, right? I still talk to them. They don't have Facebook. They don't have TikTok. They don't have any of that bullshit. I have to call them, text them, and that's the only way I can get a hold of them. I don't even have their emails because I don't even think they really give a fuck about their email. Which
I
is,
have a lot of friends that technically have a Facebook, but they're never on it. Some that are technically have an Instagram, but they're never on it.
yeah.
Um,
I have an Instagram, but it's literally just for my business purposes, and that's it.
I have, I mean, I've abandoned Instagram, but I have most of my friends are more on Instagram. A lot of my friends check Facebook every once in a while, but they stopped using it. I had a few friends that used Tumblr, but that was a
Oh,
long time
yeah.
ago.
Tumblr's pretty much dead at this point.
But everybody's on
Everybody
TikTok now.
moves.
TikTok is the new social media platform
Well,
because that's the only place you can get discovered
TikTok
in
and
order to
Twitter.
grow.
I feel like TikTok and Twitter. Those are the
Twitter's
two
dying
big
now.
ones. Well, it's
Twitter's
X
dying
now.
now.
Good. Twitter needs to die. But where are those people are going to go? Are they going to go all over
They're going to
to?
TikTok.
Oh my God.
That's the problem is because Twitter died, people are going to TikTok, and TikTok is full of kids who don't have a fully developed frontal lobe. And it's got all these kinds of censorship, and this censorship where they shadow ban you if you use certain words like death has kids using words like unalive. And I wonder
Oh
how
my
that
God.
affects their
It's
society.
so. It, I'll say this, and I'm not just trying to be a okay boomer kind of thing, but I think TikTok is going to be the single worst thing that has happened to a generation in ages.
I mean, Facebook was terrible for our generation, especially
Well,
considering how Facebook and the out and New York and internet algorithms have politically isolated people. All of our internet things are based on
here's the thing.
attention farming, so
Uh,
it's based on outrage. So all of our politics are outraged politics, all leftist politics. I've noticed it, for me personally, I unfollow anybody who makes me too angry because I know that they're outrage farming. No,
yeah.
I'm serious. There's
No,
this
okay.
there's this
Hold on.
one thing.
1 second. So, I I would say people in their 30s cuz that's basically where we're at. No,
Yeah.
you're a little bit younger than me, but that's
No,
fine.
I'm 30 now.
Oh, that's right. Jesus Christ. I remember when you were little. Um
We're so old.
it's crazy because I grew up with MySpace, right? And that was a big thing. Look, you had your five top friends
I
and
remember a friend making me make a MySpace, and I never used it.
that's fine. But it didn't affect your social life very much. And
Well,
even with the
it
here's the thing.
could, didn't have to.
Even with the beginning of Facebook, it wasn't baked into the cake at this point, right?
Right.
It was still kind of a novelty, just like, oh yeah, talk to your friends, make some posts. I didn't
I
know how
mean,
to fucking use Facebook and
I have a
MySpace when I
sibling that
first
was
came out.
essentially bullied via Snapchat. They were basically making allegations at them, and he had to like change schools via Snapchat. He had to change schools because of some shit on Snapchat. I mean, it's more nuanced than that. And basically, they spread the rumor around school about him through Snapchat.
But how?
So
What's his age? That's the thing. I'm
he is
saying
7 years younger than me. 7 years younger than me.
that's a pretty significant amount of time. So by that point, that's almost 10 years of difference when you
Yeah,
think about it. There's so much that can happen in 10 years, right? I'm saying you and me kind of grew up around just the start of this.
I think we're actually really lucky that we have the ability to unplug personally.
I
Like, if we want.
agree. I I'm honestly starting to get really pissed off with Facebook because I see nothing but ads these days. If you look, there's
Oh
literally
no,
like
I can't.
ad,
Everything's ads.
ad.
Well,
Now
all of
they
Twitter is ads too because it's technically other users promoting their own content that I
yeah.
don't want their shit. Like I'm like I didn't follow any of you guys.
I literally report every single ad for Miss what is it, false news or some other bullshit that's like impossible to prove. just because I'm so sick of it. I literally deliberately go, "Oh, here's another ad. Okay." I know it's wasting my time, but whatever.
No, but because that's how they make their money, right? Is that their ads. And the best way to get engagement is outrage farming. So the same
Yeah.
thing with our news too, right? Is we that's why
Oh, I
you have
hate.
all these people addicted to this MSNB news about Trump and his latest outrage. Honestly, I
Yeah.
personally think that's why he became president was because he was so funny and outrageous, right? Because he's a reality TV star. That's why
Kinda.
he
Yeah.
became president was because he was good on
So
TV as a character,
here's.
not as a politician or somebody who was good with policy or could do anything for people.
All right.
We have, you know,
I I'm gonna say something about your mom really quick, but I still see Trump related stuff she sends me, and
oh
I'm
no,
like,
they still talk about it and I'm just like,
Trump
look,
hasn't
I'm
been
glad.
relevant for ages. Who
Okay, so
cares?
to be fair, I do think that it's good that they're having the trial, and I he says he's going to run for president, and I
He's not
think
even gonna
that
get anywhere. It's not even like I said. It's not
I
even
hope
relevant. Nobody gives a
I
fuck
hope that he
anymore.
doesn't, but I do find that um it seems like the other Republicans can't seem to gather the same kind of fervent base that Trump can. So they might end up going back to him if they can't get that kind of base that they need and want because honestly a lot of Republicans base has become a little bit more extreme and a little bit more unpopular than moderate people, the people that actually make elections are comfortable with.
Oh, okay. So here's my take.
Like the swing voter, right?
I think well they proved that the swing voters weren't going to vote for Trump again. They need to get
Yeah.
somebody who is and this is just this my
Respectable, right?
well okay, so this is my real quick hot take on this stuff. So we're kind of divulging a little bit. I think Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, if he wants to go for president, I think that would be the best pick for the Republican Party, and I think he's the strongest one for that nomination. I think anybody else is garbage at this point in time and will fail.
Ron DeSantis needs a personality transplant. I
No,
just remember that was Trump, right?
no, it's it, and
But
I
he
think
probably lashed out if that's the only other viable option you've got
no,
for
he
that.
would be a great, reasonable thing. And you even look at, I know some of his stuff was controversial, but from a Republican standpoint and a Republican view, I think he did great. And I think he would rally the Republican Party because they're very split right now. And they're all over the place, and that's their biggest downfall. But
I This is the most divided and in shambles I've seen Republicans ever,
I know.
honestly.
And I think
I
DeSantis could pull them together and
I'm
win,
extremely grateful for Trump for that.
barring any kind of bullshit,
Cuz we
any
always have
shenanigans.
Republicans on the left. We Part of the whole point of the left is that we have so many different perspectives. Like that's the whole point
But
is
you'll
the
vote for your guy even when he's a
uh
walking
look,
house plant.
look here.
Biden is garbage,
Nobody
admit it.
nobody on my side likes Biden, honestly. Like
Gee, I wonder why. Why did you vote for him?
because he was better than Trump, obviously. And
Debatable.
I think that he's been slightly better than Trump, but I'm not going to
Why?
be
Because he
I
hasn't
am
done anything?
look, he's done quite a lot of things, but
Okay.
hey, look, I am extremely mad about Trump for how he's handled COVID, and I'm extremely mad about Biden for how he's handled COVID because it puts my life in danger, and that's my like,
Okay.
that
Yeah,
is my
exactly.
line. But well, I mean, kind of hard to put the cat back in the box when Trump, when it, anyways.
Anybody, anybody would have handled it like shit. Let's be real. I don't think
Uh,
there was one
we
person that had
had
a good idea.
we had actual COVID protocols. There was some very clear things that could have been done and would have been done. with a president that wasn't trying to make things difficult. The fact that in the beginning of the president at the beginning of the pandemic, we had states trying to outbid each other for PPE and medical equipment was a disaster when that's what we have a federal response for, is to try to coordinate to make sure who has the most need gets it, and to not like make things more expensive for each other. Like that was literally the stupidest thing. And to like have the Defense Production Act so that we produce our own medical equipment that we desperately need. Those were like two big things that could have been done right away that needed to have been done that weren't done. There, I mean,
I think no matter who would have been in power at the time, they would have handled it like dog shit because they didn't take it. Nobody, nobody took it seriously at first.
my stepdad took it seriously.
Who?
My stepdad,
Well,
he
yeah,
was right
because
immediately.
he's smart and realistic and can read the signs on the wall.
He read the scientific journals just like anybody in that administration should have been doing, but everybody in that administration was patently incompetent
Oh,
versus
everybody.
mildly,
No,
mildly
no,
incompetent.
everybody was grossly incompetent, and I think
Whereas in
anybody
Biden's administration,
they're still wildly incompetent.
a lot of them are just terrible, but it's only half versus like 90%.
Yeah, oh, it's still all of them. Let's be real. Anyway,
And so
why
the
why do you think media literacy is so important for today?
okay, so media literacy is really important because as you've got the controversies going up, there's a lot of misinformation going around, so it's hard to tell what's going on with this Israel versus Palestine thing. But also, I think it's extremely relevant because our kids are growing up now on the internet with all of this media constantly going on, so they can never unplug. So it's really important to have critical thinking skills to try to decide what's important and what's not important, and to know, like, for example, even if I read a book, nonfiction books aren't fact checked by publishers. So it's important to know like that all media is made for profit and it's done for advertising dollars, including books, including TV, and including internet, and to know how it is, how it works, what your biases are, all those things. Because otherwise, we've seen how polarized we've become politically, especially with the internet, where we're all stuck in our own internet algorithm bubbles. I
Yeah,
think that that's made things so much worse. That's partially why we are doing this podcast, right? To like kind of bridge a bit of that
contrast each other.
barrier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
contrast. Yeah,
Well, to allow people to have civil conversations again, to try to have people live in the same, well, we obviously still consume extremely different media, but to at least talk about it in person and have a real conversation instead of just flaming each other online
oh
and
yeah.
becoming more and more radicalized, right?
I think
To
that's
have,
kind of how we started talking about this political stuff. As we tried to kind of I prodded you a little bit, you prodded me back, and then it's like, well, let's talk about this.
yeah,
And it came to more like, oh well, and that's I think is interesting too. Don't take things personally. If I we leave you with one thing, don't take things personally. If you're talking to somebody with different political views, that way
yes, I
you can
totally agree.
stay objective. That way you can have a conversation, and you know you might not agree, but if you take it personally, you're going to be pissed. You're not going to think rationally. You know, and that's kind of my 2 cents. This is what
Well,
my
here's the thing
advice
is,
is.
for example, I can't, nobody's wearing masks anymore, even though that makes everybody more at risk, and including like I'm immune compromised, so I'm like doubly at risk. If I took every single thing personally like that, I would have to be like, well, everybody in my life is trying to kill me. um, but so obviously that's not how you can live life, but nobody is thinking that they're trying to kill me when they're not wearing a mask. They're just trying to assimilate to their own, to what our society is telling them to do, which is saying that
Yeah,
wearing a mask is not, is like a no-no, when our government is saying that wearing a mask means you believe that COVID is a big scary thing and blah blah blah. Like now wearing a mask is seen almost as antisocial behavior. So if you want to conform, you have to not wear a mask. When it was popular from when maskings were mandated, everybody was wearing masks. So by wearing a mask, you showed that you cared about society and that you were looking out for everybody and that you were all in this together and all this stuff. So it wasn't about any individual person or any personal beliefs or any actual material changes. It was more about if you could like if you were cohesive with society or not.
All right. And with that, we will leave you for the day. Thank you for
Thank you
coming
guys for
out,
listening.
and
Thank
you
you for
have a
listening. Sorry.
great, great day. Are you sure you haven't been the one drinking tonight?
I am very tired. But
All right.
thank you guys for listening. I would love it if you guys left your media literacy tips and if there's anything you guys took from our podcast and if you guys have any of your favorite news sources, please let us know. Thank you.
All right. Bye.